Hi everyone, I am Rebecca from ChemKnits and welcome to the recap of the August 2020 ChemKnits Dye-Along live stream. Last month we were inspired by these beautiful purple, blue, and pink hydrangea flowers that grew in the shade of my in-laws' house, and they're just spectacular. And it made me think of Broken Violet and breaking Wilton's Violet icing color. So we spent the live stream breaking purple into these beautiful gradients on sock blanks and many different fiber contents of yarn. Now, first I want to pop back in and show you what some of the yarn still looked like when wet. Here are 4 of the skeins of dip-dyed broken purple food coloring. We have our Twill, that Superwash Merino Twist, the Japanese glitter, which I think is the star from the live stream, Dyer Supplier Silvery Sock, and then the wool cotton blend. I have not put any of this yarn through the spin dryer yet, but I wanted to show them wet here so we could compare them. Now, these 2 skeins right here had the exact same amount of Color Right food coloring, and I expect that after we spin out water and after it dries, that the wool cotton blend is going to look much lighter than the Superwash wool nylon stellina blend. And you can already see the beautiful pink that we have in that stellina. These 2 skeins were dyed with the violet icing color. And while the Twill is gorgeous, it's the my signature broken violet that my logo is based off of. This Japanese glitter yarn is spectacular. This yarn is entirely synthetic. It is 51% acrylic, 44% nylon, 5% polyester. And I am so sad that it has been discontinued because it was a special reserve yarn. Check out this 2-ply yarn where 1 ply, which must have had most of the nylon, absorbed all of that color. And I'm not sure what the sparkle component is, but it definitely absorbed, just like the stellina, some of that pink color. And so this yarn is just amazing and gorgeous. We'll take a close look at all of this yarn once it's dry, but I really wanted to make sure to have a look at it now because, you know, our synthetic yarn, it might become a lot more pastel. I think that the Silvery Sock and the Twill will look very similar, but I also think that, and as I said before, I think that this wool cotton blend will also look paler. So we will see these once they are dry. Now I still have 2 more skeins of yarn pre-soaking that I didn't have time to dye in the live stream. And so we're gonna dye those right now. And then at the end, we will compare these 2 final broken violet skeins to all the rest, talk about the fiber contents, and then share some of the photos of the yarn you dyed inspired by the same inspiration photo. First up, we will dip dye 50 grams of Bare Hare into some Wilton's Violet icing color. Bare Hare is 80% wool, 20% Angora. This is a non-superwash yarn, so overall it'll probably absorb color a little slower than, say, some of the superwash yarns we did in the stream. And it could be even slower because of that Angora content, but I will talk about it once we start dipping. I'm heating up 8 cups of water, 1 tablespoon of white vinegar, and I've prepared 1/4 teaspoon of Wilton's Violet icing color and 1/2 cup of water. This is that proportion that I like to use a lot of 1/2 teaspoon of the icing color to 100 grams. And so that is ready to go once we start seeing some action here. All right, I squeezed out most of the water from our skein that is pre-soaked for a couple of days now. Added the dye, and let's start dip dyeing. Now I'm going to try to go slow because if this behaves anything like other non-superwash wools, the blue number 1 from our Wilton's Violet won't actually be able to bind without more acid. And while we're at this, what is color breaking? Color breaking is when you have a mixture of multiple different colored molecules in your dye and they absorb to the yarn at different rates. This could be based on the heat, this could be based on the pH. So like when we add it, you can see that little bit of blue. But once I raise the yarn back up, the blue sort of goes back out because The blue is sticking in the water. It is not yet binding to the yarn. And I'm having good restraint and going really slow today. Just sort of waiting for most of these reds to absorb before we go in. But when it comes to food coloring, red 3 binds really, really quickly, followed by red 40, then the yellows, yellow 5, yellow 6, and then finally blue 1. And when I go in, there is now very, very little pink in that last area. Whoops. So if I was just going to remove the yarn at this point, it would be very, very pink. I don't think we would see any blue. But notice how blue that water is now. And that, my friends, is what color breaking is. Because those reds struck fast, we were able to capture them on the yarn first, and that blue took longer. Now let's go ahead and add 2 more tablespoons of white vinegar. This should now be enough. If this were, say, superwash wool or many other things, look at how blue that is. This should be enough this should be enough acid for all of those colors to bind. But I haven't dyed this particular blend a lot. So we are on low heat. Let's wait 10 minutes and come back. I have a few videos where I talk about color breaking some more, but in general, you don't have to dip dye to see it, but it is a good way to exaggerate it. If the difference between the 2 pigments or multiple pigments in your dye mixture absorb at such different rates, like the red 3 and the blue 1 do here. It's been 10 minutes. Let's check. There is still some color in here. So this absorbed color reasonably well. If I had gone that slow and we had had superwash yarn, it would not have absorbed that quickly, but you almost want the blues to absorb super slow to get really good breaking. That almost makes it better and more beautiful. Whoop, okay, well that's just a huge splash of vinegar. I am going to leave the heat on low for 5 minutes, then turn off the heat, let it cool completely, and then I will wash it off camera. But if the color for some reason doesn't absorb, I will absolutely come and let you know. The last base that we have today is this Superwash Slub, which is amazing. It's 90% Superwash Merino, 10% nylon. And these little slubs here are so fun and cool. I have not dyed this one before. I was a little curious if the slubs might absorb color differently, but we won't really know because we just saw that nylon absorbs dye really, really well. So I'm now going to add 4 cups of water and 1 tablespoon of vinegar to our pan. This yarn was pre-soaked without vinegar. I'm moving it through to help that distribute. The heat is not yet on, and there's a fairly low level of water because I did remove a lot of yarn from our pre-soak. But I am okay with this because we are going to be coming in with all of our leftover violet that we have. And I'm coming in just cool and pouring it on. And you can see breaking already. It's very subtle compared to what we were dealing with before. But there's enough acid in here that even without heat, some of those red 3s could start binding, and then some of the blues spread out a little more. So I'm going to come in with another cup. And we're just coming in and applying this color slowly. We could end up with just super duper subtle breaking here, but there could also be something a little more pronounced. It really does depend on how everything shakes out. And I'm going to move it through, and when I move it, actually now you can see if I lift it, there's some blue in here. Oh, look at that breaking. Look at that breaking. We've got random blue and pink and purple. Oh, that is so pretty. So pretty from just moving it. And this is the reason why people say purples can be hard. but they can also be just absolutely phenomenal and fun. But my key here is just getting some amount of yarn all over, and as we add more and more dye, the amount of acid in here decreases. But oh, this is so fun. And I've got one more hint of some purple. Oof, I really like this. I could go in and keep adding more to layer more and more color. Oh, I could, but I almost don't want to. I've got some nearly empties in my stash, but you know what? I think that this is so soft and pretty. And let me zoom in so you guys can see even better. In this region right here, we've got the pink, we've got the purple, and some dusty blue. There's that little bit of everything in there already that, ooh, mwah, is wonderful. All right, I think what I'm gonna do is turn on the heat, and I'll heat this up until we see movement, heat it for 15 minutes, turn off the water, let everything cool, wash the yarn off camera. One thing to note, this pan is a dedicated dye pan. I would not then put this yarn back in a pot that you use for food. I would pour from a food container and wash it separately, but I would not use one of those spoons to stir around in here or things like that. I do try to keep things as separate as I can, but this is just a fun, subtle pastel colorway, and I have to say, this is fun. Do you like knitting with slub kind of yarns? If you do, please let me know down below in the comments, and if I should try, yeah, let me know if I should try to pick up some more of the space because I really like it. Eek! We have so much broken violet yarn to go through. I have the blanks next to me, and let's jump into it. I'm starting at the end with this slub knit yarn. This slub knit yarn from Wool to Die For is 90% superwash merino, 10% nylon, and with all of our leftover purples from Wilton's Violet Icing color to a little bit of Colorite that we mixed, we have blues, purples, and pinks in here, all very pastel and beautiful. The slubs themselves are pretty interesting. It looks like they took some pigment on the surface, but because they are a bit denser, they don't stand out from the rest of the yarn, but I think if they move around a bit, you can see like some more white towards the interior. But this yarn is just a lot of fun, and it is so soft. And I think it would be really amazing to knit with. This color white absolutely feels a little bit like a hug. It is so plush and soft. Next up, we have Hare, which is 80% merino wool, 20% Angora. This is non-superwash and is very much my, quote, classic broken violet colorway. On the 50 grams of yarn, we had a 1/4 teaspoon of Wilton's Violet Icing color for our dip dyeing. And we see, you know, our bright pinks all the way to our bright blue. And so this worked absolutely beautifully. Oh, I just noticed how bright and beautiful these colors are on my DSLR versus the way the colors showed up on my webcam, even though this one was not done during the live stream. The Angora didn't seem to make a huge difference in the rates. It felt fairly typical to me, and I love the way it turned out. And for contrast with the Hare, this is Twill. This yarn is 100% superwash merino and is beautiful. And the colors are very, very, very close. If anything, maybe some of the purples feel a little bit deeper or a little more purple, because I think more blue absorbed at the bottom than the top. These blues are a little brighter versus being a bit more pigmented than what we saw in the Hare. But I hope that this comparison and contrast here really does give a good sense to the colors as they actually are versus what we saw in the live stream. And actually, the Hare does look a lot more pink. And again, I think that's because the blues are more distributed over the entirety of the 50 gram skein. So our 100 gram skein of Twill had a 1/2 teaspoon of the Wilton's Violet Icing color on 100 grams. So the proportion of the dye and the vial that we used is the same for both. I love the Twill base, and it's so high twist that it honestly feels glazed. I mean, if you untwist it, you see that the reds just struck so fast to the outside, and it gives just a really, really fun view and dimension to the colors that we have in here. And so this is a base that I hope to play with a lot more in the future. I love high twist yarn. This Japanese glitter is the star, the absolute star of the colorways I created today, and it's no longer available. This yarn is 51% acrylic, 44% nylon, and 5% polyester. And oh my gosh, it's amazing. So the glitter is in what I think is some stellina, and it did pick up a little bit of red pigment on the more pink side, but we broke the Wilton's Violet on the nylon, and this is the closest. I mean, clearly nylon dyes with food coloring. These are 100% nylon zip ties. We know it absorbs color, but I have never tried to dye 100% synthetic fiber, and getting these results, it's just beautiful, because clearly the acrylic and polyester in the white fluff that gives it that sort of halo almost, and the nylon is mixed in with the sparkle, and that gives us this beautiful, beautiful broken colorway that is just absolutely, absolutely unbelievable. And I would, without question, buy more of this yarn if it was available. I am kicking myself for not trying it sooner. Although it's possible it did sell out really, really quickly when this became available as a special reserve yarn, I believe in 2019. Around the big sale. Do any of you know of any comparable yarn bases? It doesn't have to have the glitter component, but something that is a mixture of nylon and acrylic. I would be very, very interested to hear about those yarn bases. I don't think that you can leave links in the video description, but if you leave brand names and maybe where I can get it, that would be awesome. The blanks were done with icing color, and I will get back to those in a moment. But next, let's look at some purples that we broke that we mixed from the Color Right system. I think I used a ratio of 3 pink to 1 blue, so I had 5 drops of blue coloring and 15 drops of the base pink. That's what I think, but please correct me below if I was wrong, and I will update it in the video description. And the color here and the hue change is so similar to Wilton's Violet. In both cases, it's just blue number 1 and red number 3, and it breaks beautifully here. If anything, this is slightly less saturated than the icing color, but that's just because I could have added more dye. The Silvery Sock blend from Dyer Supply, and look how sparkly that is. It is 60% Superwash Merino, 20% nylon, and 20% stellina. It is so jam-packed, and you can get a sense of some of that sparkle right now. The stellina definitely picked up some red from the food coloring, but it is very, very still silver over on the more blue end. To contrast with the same proportions, here is our wool cotton blend dry. And remember how at the very beginning of this video I showed these two skeins next to each other while still wet? And this looked like it had a lot of pigment to it. I think that cotton in general looks deeper and more saturated when it is wet. Acrylic blends do that as well, but I think that once it dries, those fibers become less, maybe a little less translucent maybe, and so the overall color is much paler. This base was from Wool to Die For. It is so soft. This blend is 50% Superwash Merino, 50% cotton. It is very soft, and I'm not sure if you can tell on camera, but it feels very heathered, which makes sense. The cotton could potentially take a little bit of staining, but it is really the wool that is absorbing the pigment here. This is my first time dyeing this blend, and trying it with Breaking Purple and having something to compare it to I think is really, really helpful. I like this base a lot. It is so unbelievably soft that I would like to explore dyeing this more in the future. Before I get into the blanks, I just wanted to take a moment to think about the variety of fiber contents we explored. Wilton's Violet and Breaking Violet is a comfort zone for me, and a lot of times I like to use it to explore new yarn bases, because since it's something that I've explored in so many different ways, it is a good baseline for me to understand how a yarn base might absorb color and to compare the differences to each other. Now, not everything here had the exact same amount of dye, but I do think that it is a really, really helpful starting place. And so I know that this month with our hydrangea inspiration, as far as a colorway goes, this technique was a little expected, especially coming from me. But I feel like we learned so much on all of these bases. I dip dyed 3 double-stranded sock blanks into Wilton's Violet Icing color at the same time. These blanks are all 75% Superwash Merino, 25% nylon. They are double-stranded, which means that there's 2 50-gram balls of yarn knit together. And I set up 1 teaspoon of Wilton's Violet food coloring for all 3. So each of them had about a 1/3 teaspoon, which is less than what we had in our Twill, but more than what we had on our Japanese glitter. In all of these, we have a similar gradient of our pinks into a more periwinkle purple blue into a lighter blue that has some modeling at the end. But you can see some differences in here. For example, this blank here, the pink goes a little bit further. This one, I think the blue comes a little bit further. And so the real amazing thing about having these as matched pairs, having 2 50-gram balls of yarn knit together, is that if you were to take both of the skeins from this blank, you will get matched pair of socks or a symmetrical gradient. You could still have a really good match between some of these, but it wouldn't be as identical. And so that is a real benefit to using these blanks. A lot of times with sock blanks, I don't want to unravel them. I mean, I always want to unravel them to see what they look like, but I like having them intact so you can get a sense of the color progression. And I think with a simple dip dye blank like this, it's really easy to envision how if you started at the toe of socks and knit up, how those colors could progress through your knitting. When you have something that is a lot more random, it can be a little harder to visualize how the colors could progress without looking at the whole thing. So I am going to go ahead and unravel, I think, 2 of these blanks. Isn't it amazing how different these 2 sets look skeined up? And really it's just because for one, it started winding at the pink side and the other it started winding at the blue. And so twisted, that's just the color that you see. Now, when these are unraveled, it is not a smooth gradient. There is modeling in here because of the resist that we have on the blank. There's a little bit of it in the blue area, but it's the most obvious in that pink where we almost see those speckles. And it's just beautiful. And if I were to come look at the blank, if you spread it apart, you can see some of those little blue speckles in here that exist because of the resist in the blank. So while, again, these look different, they are actually the same colorway. Those were those 2 other blanks that we dip dyed. Now, the one thing you may notice here is if I untwist this and you look at the yarn, you can see it is very crimped, and then you can see all of that pink in there. And so I will go and soak these in some tap water to relax that twist off camera, so that way they won't be quite as crimped when you knit with it. Finally, we scrunched 1 more sock blank in a pot and used just a little bit of some green. I think we used 2 drops of yellow, 1 drop blue, creating a very sort of mottled green base. And then we used some leftover Wilton Violet sprinkles. I had mixed Wilton Violet icing color with some sugar to create these sprinkles, and we speckled onto the yarn, heavy at one end and really light at the other. So when this is eventually unraveled and we have a tiny peek of it here, We will likely see a mottled green, both from the mottled of the dye, but also the resist of the stitches. And then more of these broken violet speckles, which I will bring you in even closer in a moment, but more at one end and less at the other. And they're broken violet because you see the blue and the pink, and you can really see it in close over here. And we went real heavy with these speckles. It really makes it look like flowers on a green base, which I think is really, really lovely. A lot of times people ask how a blank might knit up. And it really does depend on the stitch pattern and the stitch number. But I think that this blank and those other gradient blanks are two where it'll knit up in a way that feels fairly similar to what we see here, because we'll have light speckles at one end that get heavier at the other, and they could occasionally sort of patch up in places. It's again not going to be identical, but similar. And so therefore I'm not going to unravel this blank because I don't think it's going to give us more information. But when I add blanks into my shop, I usually include an option for the customer to have me unravel it for them. And so that is something that is an option and would be available if you would prefer to knit or crochet from it, not doing 2 at a time socks, but using just 1 at a time. Now it is time for my favorite part of the ChemKnits Dialong, where I feature some of the colorways that you created, inspired by this same hydrangea photo. This is the main reason why these recap videos take weeks to come out, because I want to give all of you time to create your own yarn with the same inspiration. And you're not limited to the techniques or the dyes that I use. The goal is just to see how so many different fiber artists can look at one image and what they draw from that. Whether it's a literal interpretation of the colors or a more interpretation of what the feeling of the photo evokes, it is just really fun to see what all of you create. If you would like to be featured in future ChemKnits Dialong recaps, then share your yarn that you dyed inspired by the inspiration photo on Instagram with the hashtag ChemKnitsDialong, or on Facebook by replying to the inspiration photo on the public page. By default, any picture shared in my Facebook group, ChemKnits Lab, will be kept private because the policies of the group are not to share any posts or anything outside of the group. I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and I really hope that you enjoyed this video. It was so much fun for me to take another deep dive into Wilton's Violet food coloring, and I mean, this isn't going to be the last one. I will revisit this again and again and again because I absolutely love it. It is one of the things that got me so excited about dyeing yarn in the first place, and so curious. And even now, as I am moving more and more into using commercial dyes, a lot of techniques and things that you do between food coloring and commercial acid dyes still translate back and forth really, really well. So if you're nervous to get started with your dyeing journey, start with food coloring. It is so accessible, easy to find, and you get beautiful, brilliant colors. And then when you're ready, you can make the move and get some dedicated dye equipment and respirator masks to move on to dealing with dye powders. And I do have blog posts on my website of my favorite tools and equipment, and even where you can find different respirator masks that other indie dyers recommend. I'll have links to all of that, including more information about the yarn bases. All of that will be down in the video description. Please subscribe to the ChemKnits Tutorials YouTube channel and turn on notifications so you never miss a new video. We always do these dye-alongs around the middle of the month, but I also release 2 new yarn dyeing videos every single week, and you really don't want to miss any of it. Thank you so much for watching, everyone.